Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT and SAT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT exam. A full textbook, tons of questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial at achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Annie Tadros from AM Professional Tutoring with us. And Annie, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself and your company.
Okay. My name is Annie Tadros, and I'm the director of a boutique test prep company called AM Professional Tutoring. And our niche in the test prep world is that we consistently help students to get large score increases. Large score increases are not the industry standard in the test prep world. And we have been around for nearly a quarter of a century. And we started teaching online, live one-on-one online back in 2007.
Nice. Yeah, so today we're going to
Yeah.
be that meant you were one of the first people doing online tutoring, I think. But so today our topic is how to select a test prep company or the type of test prep that is best for you. And when we talked sort of in our pre-show meeting, you had a lot of really strong opinions about this and kind of which types of prep are suited for different types of learners. And so I'm really excited to talk with you about this. Why don't you take it from the top? Kind of what are the things that people should be thinking of when they first are looking at
Okay.
doing
Well,
prep?
the first thing that I want to mention, the reason I have some strong opinions about this is because when an individual has an expertise in a particular industry, they know how to filter through all the noise, if you want to put it that way, noise information, and find the most suitable option for them. But when you don't have expertise in a particular industry, it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging. Every time I have to find an auto mechanic, it's challenging. So to find the right product. And whenever I look out there, because I'm always, looking to see what's happening in the test prep world, I read a lot of, blogs on the best tutoring companies and what have you. And there's a lot of information it's very well written, but not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
So, and I know that I would be making not necessarily the best choice unless I understood the industry. So the first thing that you need to do, that any student needs to do, is they need to understand what the test is about and the content of the test.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm saying that is because you have no idea how many calls we get from students either the week before the exam or 2 weeks before the exam that are looking for large score increases. And they think that this is, you know,
Right.
this, you know, dive into it for a week or two and we're there where we need to be. Not so, not if you're talking about large score increases. What the exam is about, both SAT and ACT, they're very similar in terms of the content that's covered. They're not like regular school exams. They cover roughly 8 to 9 years worth of academic knowledge and skills. Skills, by skills, I mean a skill is not something you can study. A skill is only something you can practice.
Mm-hmm.
Like Okay, so the reading comprehension portion on both the SAT and ACT, for example, is primarily skill based. The math and the grammar are primarily concept based, but there's still an element of skill involved, something which doesn't exist on a regular school exam.
Right.
Okay, so the idea of doing a cram session or a few cram sessions and expecting, large score increases or to a large extent even moderate score increases is misguided,
Mm-hmm.
not likely to happen. The second thing that you should look at is you should understand the test prep try to understand the test prep industry itself. Okay, that's very important. I mean, any industry, um, that you're looking at. If you're looking for an accountant, if
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for a physician, it's good to know something to have some background information about the industry in general.
Right.
So the test prep industry, as you know, I mean, you're very rarely are you going to look at a website that claims to help you get moderate or low score increases.
Yeah.
So the claims across, pretty much most of the claims are for large score increases. Those are very common claims that are made. But the reality of the matter is that moderate score increases are in fact the industry standard. And I would have never known that unless I've been in the industry, as I said, for nearly a quarter of a century. Why? Because that's the most profitable business model.
Hmm.
Okay, moderate score, and surprisingly enough, for example, when you have students who get an extra 2 points on the ACT, or an extra, say, 50 points on the SAT, you'd be surprised. They're pretty pleased, and they feel that the course or their prep was successful.
Hmm.
Now, and I'm not, so those in my opinion are moderate score increases.
Yeah, maybe it's important to define what like is a small, moderate, and large score increase for each of the tests real quick, if you're open to doing that.
Right, right, yeah. For us, large score increases are obviously in excess of 100 points, but our students on a our students, I mean, I would say 98% of them, if they complete the full length course, are able to get approximately 300 points and 300 plus points on the SAT, and I guess 9 plus points on the ACT.
Got it.
So that those are large score increases, but anything I would say in excess of 100 points, could qualify as large score increase. It's just that we try to go as large as possible.
Right. Well, and so I
Um,
think that that's also important, like level setting too, right? And maybe it was my mistake for not starting us out more on this topic, but I feel like parents and students' expectations of the amount of a score increase they can get in an amount of time is usually way off, right? And then so
Absolutely.
yeah, if you're looking at a score increase of 100 points as your target, right? Like how long should you expect to study, and how, if that's like a tutoring program, how many weeks do you think that tutoring program
Yeah,
is?
that largely depends on the student. In terms of the number of hours that they might spend to get 100 extra points, in terms of their study time alone without tutoring, it may be, I say, probably in excess of 20 hours.
Hmm. Yeah.
For sure. That's without any tutoring time. That's but probably, but it depends on what students might get stuck on. For example, okay, the way to get large score increases is the more concepts that a student masters, the more concepts and skills that are tested that a student masters, the larger will be their score increases. Okay?
Hmm.
It's that simple. The College Board and the ACT company give you a list of concepts and skills that are tested, and the more concepts and more skills you have mastered, the higher your score increases. So if a student, when we're working with a student, if they haven't mastered a particular concept or skill, we don't move on to the next concept or skill. We stay with that concept and skill until they've attained a level of mastery before moving on.
Hmm.
Okay, so that can take a little longer, obviously, than if you just randomly keep moving on, whether a student has mastered the skill or the level of knowledge or skill required, and you just move on.
Got it.
Do you understand what I'm So there's never, each student can be different, and it depends on how much they're applying themselves, how they do their homework, whether they do homework or not.
Hmm.
So all these are, moving targets.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, I think that the other thing too is being realistic, like you said, with the 20 hours, right? Like trying to be realistic about how you're actually going to get those hours done and actually getting them done. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how good of a tutor anyone is or how good of a prep program anyone gets, they've got to actually do the work.
Well, yeah, yes and no. We can work with students who will not do any homework. We have parents who contact us and who tell us right off the bat, Susie or Johnny are not going to do any homework. Can you still help them? We can, but it is going to be more costly. It's going to require more tutoring time because at the end of the day, the work that has to be done is the work that has to be done. That's it. you know so if you only want to do the work while you're in session with the instructor, that's fine. If you therefore more tutoring time is going to be required, greater expense. If on the other hand you're willing to do homework, less tutoring time will be required, and obviously less of an expense.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think in just in general, also it's important to understand like what kind of student that you or your child is. And I'd love if you could maybe talk about like the different types of students that you see and kind of whatever categories you want to
Right,
use, and then kind of what you
right.
feel like is the best prep program for each one. But let's start first with just like what are the types of students?
Well, we work a lot with student athletes.
Hmm.
Okay, so you've got student athletes who have um, games, regattas, tournaments, and they're traveling all the time. That's one type of student.
Hmm.
Another type of student is your strictly academic, high achieving student who is involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. Another type of student that is being forced to do the test prep program at the point of a gun by their parents.
Hmm.
That's the most challenging student to work for. And another type of student is the do-it-yourselfer.
Hmm.
Now, for a do-it-yourselfer, we've had parents that have tried to force tutoring on a child that's a do-it-yourselfer. Believe it or not, that does not work very well. They are fighting and kicking every step of the way, and the parents should really save their money. And if your child is a do-it-yourselfer, then the best thing for them is a good automated program. You will get results with that. Forcing a child who's never had a student who's never had tutoring, never felt that they needed any extra help, and if they do, they will try to tackle it themselves,
Hmm.
will not yield positive results, is not likely to yield positive results. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
The student who is being forced, I mean, I'm talking not, figuratively speaking, not literally speaking, at the point of a gun by their parents, that's a very challenging student to work with. Um, but as long as they are willing to work with us in session, as long as while we're in session, they're not texting or falling asleep or not showing up at all, we can work with them.
Hmm.
But we have seen on rare instances where a student has absolutely positively simply decided that they didn't want to.
Right.
So, in that case, that's an issue because, um, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Hmm.
So,
Well, it's also just
it's
like no amount of putting a gun to someone's head can make them really
mhm,
truly
mhm.
study and like care while
No,
they study.
no,
And if they don't care
no.
while they study and they're just kind of doing it to do it, they're not going to do as well.
Yeah, no, and this particular student, because in my 25 years, I've had one extra special, extra crispy student. Let's just put it that way, that I remember. And most of the time, he would show up to a 1 hour session 45 minutes late, if he would show up at all. Um, he would frequently sleep in session,
Hmm.
and he had quite a few. I mean, he had quite a few cancellations where he just wouldn't show up at all.
Mm.
So, That was very challenging, and we were not able to do very much with that.
Hmm. Yeah, I can only
So
imagine.
yeah, I mean, you have to at least participate in session at the very least. I mean, we can work with that, but if you don't show up at all, and if you're sleeping, and if you're texting, and if you're just, that not going to happen. Not going to happen. Then there are the students that are, the high achieving students that are self-motivated, but they have a lot of extracurricular activities. The problem there is if you're working within a very restricted period, if you have a year to prep, no problem. Stick with those activities, take on every extracurricular activity you feel like taking on. But if you're coming to us, say in January of your junior year, or even a little later than that, then most likely, if you want to attain large score increases, you may have to, um, you know, I guess, uh, put aside some of your extracurricular activities. That's all I have to say. Just you may have to put aside some of your extracurriculars.
Right.
It depends. It depends on how many you've got. But those students are also, some of them are just an absolute delight to work with. Um, but what these students have to understand is when you're doing your homework for SAT and ACT prep, you you have to be very focused, and you have to do it when you're completely fresh. It's not like doing homework for school where for example, when I was in school and when I was in college, I loved to do my work in the middle of the night.
Hmm.
It was just my ideal. It's just something I really enjoyed. If I tried to do that for SAT or ACT prep, which, as I said, even the math and the grammar section do entail an element of skill,
Hmm.
it wouldn't be worth very much. Okay, the work that you're doing would not be worth very much. So you really need to be very, very focused on the work that you do. You can't be doing your work in the middle of the night. You need to have had, you need to be well rested before you're working, before you're doing your homework. All these are very, very important. They're just very important features of practicing for the SAT and ACT, which don't necessarily apply to regular school homework.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's also something to be said where, like, you touched on it just briefly there, and I think that that's such an important point. Is like if you're either the academically, like that, what I wrote down in my notes is the academic hero, right? The person who's trying to do 3 AP classes and get like a
Oh
bunch of
yeah.
extracurriculars and whatever. Or if you're the student athlete, you run into the same problem, which is if you're doing test prep with the last 10% of your brain power at the end of the night, you're
Mm,
not really getting the most value
mm-mm.
out of it, right?
Not gonna work. Yeah, imagine with achievables. Okay, when you've got achievables, imagine if a student is just like, they're very tired, they're totally exhausted, and they're just clicking through. They make a lot of mistakes. How how well are they learning?
Hmm.
You know, you just need to, and again, it's different because I have a lot of students that when they're doing their school homework, they may make a lot of mistakes on their school homework, but since the tests look very much like the homework that you've been practicing with, they can make up for that a few days before the exam and still go in there and do well.
Yep.
Not the case with the SAT and ACT because although they all, the test makers test the same concepts and skills, they never look the same from one test to the other. So different. I always tell students, just remember how you practice is how you play the game.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's also something that you can always kind of, or like one of the episodes that I did on this podcast earlier was how preparing for a test is kind of like preparing for a sporting event, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, you can apply those lessons to this.
Especially for the SAT and the ACT, because every section, as I said, no, involves an element of skill. The reading comprehension is primarily skill based on the SAT and the ACT. The science section is a combination of on the ACT is a combination of reading comprehension and data analysis. So large skill based factor there. Grammar and math, lower skill based feature, but because they're primarily concept based, but still the skill is there. So it really is, it's much closer to, I guess, if you want to say a sporting event than a college or a high school exam. I used to go into college exams, having stayed up 24 hours and I could ace it.
Hmm.
I couldn't possibly do that even with the SAT, a college entrance exam. Um, I have 9 years of college, so and that's just a simple college entrance exam that high school students take. And if I tried to do that with the SAT or the ACT, I would bomb big.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, the best way to study for these things is over a long period of time, right?
Yes, 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 you understand. And that's why I started out with saying, understand the content of the test, because it's a misconception. Oh, I can do this in a week, I can do this in 2 weeks or something. It's a misconception that both parents and students have.
Yeah.
So, and, and so it's just, sometimes, and I guess maybe for parents it was a different. If you go back, 30 years ago or so, students who were, vying for, say, state colleges, uh, perhaps their test scores were not necessarily as significant as they might be today.
Hmm.
And so, maybe, so I don't know, that could be an issue, but both parents and students equally have a misconception about that.
Yeah.
And I would not, if you're vying for large score increases, I would most certainly advise against starting test prep it at the end of January or the beginning of February of your junior year. It's feasible. It's definitely feasible. We've done it, but you're just making it harder on yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that probably is a nice segue into kind of like the next segment of this, which based on the type of student that you're dealing with, right? Or maybe it's universal for all students, but like how, when do you recommend people start looking at getting prepared? And
Mhm.
then I'd love if we could then transition to like kind of outlining the different options that people have.
Okay. In terms of when they start getting prepared, I would say that depends on, I guess, the target scores and the colleges that they're vying for. I strongly recommend that students take a either a PSAT. It doesn't have to be formal. They can just get a copy of it and take it under test taking conditions. Either a PSAT, an actual previously administered SAT, or an actual previously administered ACT after freshman year of high school. Okay, get some baseline score there, because that it will give you an idea of your strengths and weaknesses. Okay. And one thing that I've noticed, if a student doesn't really do any prep, frequently, I'm not going to say always, but frequently, students are not going to see that huge an increase between, you know, the test that they've completed at the end of freshman year versus junior year. You would think there would be, but frequently there isn't. I have seen times where yes, there have been increases, but I've also seen instances where there haven't been any increases, and I'm baffled.
Yeah.
So I definitely just get an idea. It doesn't mean you have to start prepping at that time,
Hmm.
but if you take a practice test, say at the beginning or even at the end of your freshman year of high school, then you're going to get an idea of how far you are away from your target score. You're going to get an idea of your strengths and your weaknesses, and you can just start to plan. That's it. Plan.
Right. Yeah, and plan and also start to understand like what are the areas where you're maybe a little bit weak, right? I think that
Right.
the big thing is that most of the SAT and ACT are taught in school. Like that's where you're going to
Oh,
learn all the
everything.
concepts, right? So at the end of if at the end
Absolutely.
of
The concepts and the skills. Yeah.
yeah, so if at the end of
Yeah.
freshman year you realize that math is really a hard subject for you, then it's like, okay, time to pay more attention in my math class, time to like get ahead of the problem.
Yeah, actually, the students that were, I guess they're were vying for Ivy League colleges. Their parents, a lot of times, the parents were ahead of the game, and we'd start working with them. Just not it's not SAT or ACT prep. We're just working with them on the concepts and skills they're weak on. For example, a student who was very strong in math, but his or her writing and reading skills you know, were not as strong. We started working with them nice and slow, just, from middle school, from about grade 7 onwards.
Hmm.
So, absolutely everything that's tested on the SAT and the ACT is knowledge that you were supposed to have acquired from, I guess, from elementary school onwards
Hmm.
when you got in high school, and knowledge that has not been properly or assimilated at the I guess at the level required
Hmm.
by the test. You're gonna it'll show up. It'll show up.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense and it's good advice. So then the next thing I wanted to ask about is the different types of ways you can prepare, right? I think that obviously Achievable has an ACT course that's an online self-serve course. There's definitely others out there as well. And then there's doing, you could buy a physical book, you could take a physical, like an in-person class, you could take an online class, you could do one-on-one tutoring. I'm curious kind of what you think about each type of prep product and also which types of students are best for each one.
I think it's great that there's so many options today, because when I was growing up
Hmm.
and I was a student, not not much that was out there at all. So the options that are available are great. Now, what option is best for each student? You have to understand, um, number one, what a student's baseline score is. A baseline score is a student's score before they open a book, before they do any prep of any sort.
Hmm.
Okay, that's your baseline score. Okay, so baseline versus target score is an important feature to consider. The student's own personality is another important is very important, and those are probably the two biggest factors to consider. Now, if a student, first of all, you start off by taking a practice test, or even go in and take a real exam if you want. Um, either or will work just fine. And the practice test you take, by the way, should be a real previously administered either College Board SAT or ACT company's ACT exam.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it
don't
must
like always use the official tests for benchmarks.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, because they are configured in a different way than test maker like exams, and your most accurate scores are going to come from real previously administered um, test maker exams. So take one of those under test taking conditions. By test taking conditions, I mean a proctor should be in the room at all times.
Well,
You haven't taken a look at the, sorry.
I was gonna say, in place of a proctor, right? Then is that your parent, or like how would you
No,
do
you
that?
can have your parent can proctor.
Yeah.
Your your older brother or sister or your younger brother and sister can proctor. They just have to, yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't have to be somebody that you hire to proctor. No, absolutely. Parents can proctor, a friend can proctor, no problem. The exams should be taken at 8:30 in the morning.
Hmm.
Just as it's like a real dress rehearsal. You wake up early in the morning, have a good breakfast, and you haven't taken a look at the exam before
Hmm.
before you start taking it. Timing is strictly adhered to. Not 1 second more on each and individual section, and ideally, you don't have any noise going on, no dogs barking, cell phones ringing, you're not texting anybody,
Hmm.
and you're really and by the way, why I'm saying proctor, I know it sounds a little weird, but from our experience, what we've noticed that students that take their practice tests all by themselves in their room in comfy slippers, they can do up to believe like up to 100 points on the SAT better than when they're being proctored. We just I guess we react differently when we're being watched,
Hmm.
and especially in a situation where I mean it's a very tense situation when you're taking your SATs or your ACTs, and sometimes you can cut the air with a knife. The
Hmm.
tension is so thick, and that can affect your performance quite a bit.
Right.
So we want students to get accustomed to being watched, because when they're taking the real test, they're going to be watched. And so if you want the most accurate practice test results, you want to mimic real test taking conditions as much as possible.
Right. Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
once you've done that, for students that are on the lower end of the spectrum, for example, let's say a student is starting off with a 12 on 36 on the ACT, and they're aiming for a 20 or higher. I would say for these students, I would not recommend doing solely an automated program.
Hmm.
Um, I would not recommend necessarily classroom or small group, even small group tutoring for those students. For those students, I would strongly recommend one-on-one prep.
Hmm.
Now, you can use an automated program in conjunction with the one-on-one live prep, and I'm talking live, so you're not sitting there and watching recordings. You're actually interacting with the instructor. Um, as I said, you can use an automated program in conjunction with that, but I would not say using an automated program alone.
Yep.
If you're a student who has a lot of extracurricular activities, or if you're a student athlete, and I'm not saying this applies for all student athletes, I'm just saying for a large number of the times, you should, I would recommend signing up to a course that will provide the structure needed. So you have to complete your work by a certain day or time. You need to attend the sessions. Now, it could be an online for student athletes. It has to be the most convenient solution is an online solution,
Hmm.
because frequently they're traveling, they're out practicing, a lot, and so some online solution, whether it's live online or a live class online or even a pre-recorded class, that would be probably the better option for them. Now, in terms of, so we've talked about the high achieving, the students that are starting, lower on, I guess they're starting a little low, anything in the 300s or less on the SATs,
Hmm.
anything, I would say 14 or 15 or below on the ACTs. I would strongly recommend one-on-one prep. Now, what you need to know is that not all one-on-one prep is created equally. Not all online or automated programs are created equally. So it's very, very important to understand, I guess, to try and figure out how good the program that's being offered is. And it's good when you have a try before you buy option.
Hmm.
And I believe Achievables offers that, and we offer that as well. Strongly recommended if you have a try before you buy option, so you can see how helpful this program seems to be for you. You know how good is it? How helpful it be?
Hmm.
Um, and oh, by the way, a lot of these programs that have guaranteed score increases, all I have to say is read the fine print.
Yes, I agree with
It's
that. Ours is has remarkably little fine print, and that's kind of the point. But so many of our, like so many other vendors I see out there, they have a score increase that is predicated on a ton of things, that a ton of hoops,
mm-hmm,
and like
mm-hmm.
basically, realistically, if you go through all those hoops, you will get the score increase just by nature of the fact that it's like forcing you to do like probably more than enough work to reach it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're hedging their bets, which is fine. Like that's the way that these things work.
And
But
by the way, nobody's going to offer you like a score guarantee when you're working one-on-one with an instructor. Okay, that's not going to happen anywhere. It could be they might offer that for automated programs or for a classroom, you know. But the score guarantees, it's very funny. I contacted this one company that had this, presumably ironclad 200 point score increase, and I guess I knew which questions to ask. And the individual that I was speaking to admitted that, of course, not all or even most of our students get 200 point increase. And I go, well, how many students get a refund? And she goes, about 5%. They knew the exact number. She goes, every year about 5%.
yeah, and
Right there.
5% is actually quite high.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, they're probably, it's like a marketing trick, right? You do the math on
Yes,
how
it is. And
much
it's a
more
very,
marketing you can
mhm.
get for with that 200 point score guarantee. Anyway, we don't need to get into like the
No,
brass
but
tacks of this, but
it's a very good marketing technique. Uh, Another thing that I just want to mention, there's also another type of prep where you have either a course versus somebody who says it's like a pay as you go thing.
mhm.
If you're doing a pay as you go, unless if you're a student who knows exactly and you're right on the money of knowing exactly what your weaknesses are. For example, I can't get right angle triangles, we're going to work on that. Or do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or I can never figure out the main point of a passage that I'm reading. Fine, that one on that pay as you go thing may very well work out well for you. Otherwise, in most instances, it will not, because most frequently students don't, a student may not necessarily recognize what they are not strong in.
Mhm.
Okay, they may say, well, I'm not strong in geometry because I haven't taken geometry for a while, but they might not realize that they're not strong in functions either.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? So the problem with the pay as you go type of prep is that generally the individuals will say provide your own test prep materials and we'll work through it.
Mhm.
In other words, let's log into, if you're doing it online, let's log into Khan Academy or whatever materials the student has available, and the instructor will kind of go through it as they go along. Um, it's not necessarily the best way to proceed. Number one, if you're looking for large score increases, and yeah, if you're looking for large score increases, highly unlikely that this will give you an increase of I don't know, we'll go to the max and we'll say 100 points or more on the SAT,
Hmm.
or 4 points or more on the ACT. So I I generally I don't recommend these pay as you go situations, but it's conceivable that it may work for some individuals. I would say a minority of students, not a majority of students.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think just in general, it's also important to understand like what the prep you're paying for is actually going to get you, right? And
Absolutely.
I feel like you had some thoughts on that as well.
Oh yeah. By the way, the most expensive, just as anything in life, anything that you're buying, the most expensive isn't necessarily the best,
Hmm.
nor is it necessarily the worst, but you just have to understand that it's not necessarily, it's not like, pay more, get more.
Hmm.
Not necessarily. So, so one, obviously, if you're working with, automation, it's going to be less costly. So if you're working with, if it's a pre-recorded program or if it's an automated program, obviously that's the most cost-effective way to work, and it could also be very, very effective. So that's one way of proceeding. I mean, when cost is an issue. But again, you have to understand that if you're below a certain range, like if you're in the 300s or lower on the SAT, if you're in the 15 or lower on the ACT,
Hmm.
I would not recommend just an automated program. It may be cost effective, but you got to get results as well. Otherwise, what's the point? So sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's also just like important to recognize like who you're buying from, right?
Absolutely,
I think that when you
absolutely.
get tutoring from like a large big box firm versus an individual tutor, it's a very different program.
It is because larger companies, first of all, in terms of cost, you have to understand that larger companies have a greater overhead.
Hmm.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed, number one. Number two, larger companies, imagine if you have, millions of students and thousands or tens of thousands of instructors. You can't personalize the experience because if an instructor is having certain issues, like for example, a student doesn't grasp a certain concept, the instructor does not have the the freedom or the liberty or the discretion of saying, okay, we need to stick with this. They have to move forward with the program. Okay, the program is what it is. I always give parents and students the example of like when you're with a larger company. Okay, let's say a student is given 20 problems on right angle triangles, for example. One student comes back with two right out of 20, and the other one comes back with 18 right out of 20. If you have one-on-one prep with a large company, the instructor is going to be able to explain to each student all the questions that they answered incorrectly. However, the instructor is also going to then, for the next session, move on to the next concept.
Hmm.
That's okay for the person who got 18 on 20 right, but the person that got 2 on 20, they obviously need more practice.
Hmm.
But and that's why, although sometimes objectively the program materials may be good, the students would not consistently um, get large score increases with certain programs because just remember, in order to get large score increases, the more concepts and skills that you master, the greater the score increases. So if you have an issue with a particular concept or skill,
Hmm.
and somebody explains it to you, and you feel okay, this is good, and you don't touch it again until the day of the exam, how well do you think you're going to do when you're dealing um, with those concepts and skills on the exam? Just look at it that way.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, another thing I wanted to bring up,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that parents and students should be very wary of are test prep companies that claim that their very special test taking tips and tricks and techniques um, are what they rely on to help you increase your score.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Test taking tips are important for any exams
Mm-hmm.
that you might take, but exclusively relying on taking tips and techniques and quote unquote tricks may, under the best conditions, get you marginal score increases, but you're going to reach a plateau and you are not going to be able to get large score increases that way. And
Right.
here's another
Well, and
way,
also
and here's another,
there's
go
just
ahead.
like there are what like at least 1,000 ACT and SAT tutors in the United States, as my conservative guess, and the SAT and ACT have been around for ever, right? Longer than most of us have been
for,
tutoring, and
for a long
like
time,
how
for a long
secret
time.
can your secret trick really be, right? Like like if you have a special hack for like a type of problem, then sure, right? But if you're saying you have these like test breaking things, that is probably not true.
Well, you nailed it, Tyler, because here's the thing. If anyone or any company had come up with test-taking tips, tricks, or techniques that helped you to get large score increases, they would corner the market and put everybody out of business. It's that simple. It's that simple. If anybody through all these years has come up with some, like brilliant test taking tips, tricks, and techniques which could help you get large score increases, that's it. Game over.
Mm,
Everybody else is this is a multi the test making industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
mm.
They would corner the market. They'd put everybody out of business. That's simple.
Yeah.
So
And then also the people who make the test would change the test so that that trick didn't work if it was actually that important.
absolutely. 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 Actually, they'd sue you into oblivion because that's what they would do.
Yeah. So then my I guess then just to kind of like as we get towards wrapping this up, do you have any sort of just general advice or sort of closing thoughts on how people should approach selecting the test prep that they're looking for and what
Well,
works best for each
we're
student?
extremists. Yeah, we're extremists. One of the tips I tell students and parents when they're looking for a test prep company, at least live. I'm talking about live prep is ask if you have the same instructor for all subjects on the test that are tested. Because if you have the same grammar instructor that also teaches math, I'm not saying it's not possible that you can't have an excellent grammar instructor and who's also fantastic at math. I am going to say that it's not. Um, it happens infrequently.
Hmm.
It's perhaps the exception and not the rule. Let's just put it that way. So that's one thing. Ask them whether they're using real previously administered exams for their practice test. Ask them how many practice tests are taken, and ask them whether they work through one test after another, or if they have practice materials first and then start their practice test taking segment of the course at the end.
Hmm.
That's another thing that you should look at. Um, a lot of um, a lot of test prep companies, what they do is they'll just work through one practice test after another with a student.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that that won't yield results. I'm just saying, in fact, it does yield results because otherwise nobody would do it. But it, basically, it limits your score increases. And and then when a student, so let's say, for example, a student worked with an instructor who was just, you know, um, working from the practice tests on Khan Academy or the practice tests on, or the ACT practice tests on the ACT website. Just that's all they did by with prepping a student. Student takes the exam and they get maybe an extra you know, 50 points on the SAT or an extra 2 points on the sorry, an extra 50 points on the SAT, an extra 2 points on the ACT. Then they're like, this is great. Let me continue. I want to do more. I want to, you know, let's get another 50 points.
Hmm.
Using that technique, what they'll find that they're going to reach a plateau, and they'll frequently they'll retake the test, and they, you know, they won't see, you know, a score increase as they had last time, and they'll wonder what happened. And unfortunately, the explanation that they're given is incorrect.
Hmm.
The explanation that they're given is that you've maxed out. This is what parents, college counselors tell the students: is you've maxed out your score, and that is the saddest thing.
Yep.
It can, I mean, that's very, very upsetting, because you're telling a child, you're telling a student they can do no more than that they're not capable of it. And if it, but it's not even true. It's not even true. The only way to max out your score on the SAT is to get a perfect 1600, and on the ACT is to get a perfect 36.
Hmm. And also, it's really like not everybody has time, right? And to
Nope.
keep working on it, and not everybody has necessarily had the best foundational education, right? Which can be limiting. But even in those
Absolutely.
circumstances, if you had unlimited time, you could relearn all of algebra, you could relearn, right? Like you could do it.
Yeah.
It really is just a
Yeah.
matter of putting in the work, and unfortunately,
Right.
high school kids now are busier than ever, and so that's harder than
Right.
ever. But that is
Yep.
the way, like you can always improve. I like that philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a question of time, effort, and if you're going to be working with, you know, a test prep company, money. So it's all these factors. A few years ago, I worked with a student. She was a straight A student, at the high school that she attended, but her scores on, particularly on the math section of the SAT when she took it, were in the lower 300s.
Hmm.
And she was, I mean, for a top flight student at school, I mean, she's like, you know, she's got like a 4.0 at school and everything. This was very jarring for her. When we started working together, I told her, I said, you know, if you want to go to the 700s, mid upper 700s, you can do it. And she's like, I can. And I go, yep, you can. And we started working together, and she worked very hard, and she got herself into the upper 500s, you know, which was excellent. And I told her another 4 weeks, and she would have been in the mid 600s, and she decided to stop.
Yeah.
She was like, okay, no, not gonna do it. Now I know I can, not gonna.
Interesting. Well, everybody's got different goals and what they're going for, right? But I think at the end of the day, that's the other key thing that you just need to be thinking about, whether you're a student or a parent, is what are your goals really, right? And do you have the commitment
Right,
to stick to those goals? Because if your goal
right,
is that you're truly going for like a 750, let's say, and you're willing to put in the work, right? Then that return on investment for the amount of money it costs for you to get a prep program or tutoring might be materially different than if you did a lot less prep or tutoring and paid a lot less money, but then went to a very different type of college, right? It
right.
is about sort of, and also just being realistic with yourself on what is accomplishable for you slash your child given their circumstances and their schedule. But
Right.
I think just like thinking about all these things ahead of time and having a plan and having commitment from the child to execute that plan and buy-in, right? They're motivated. It's not you holding a gun to their head. I think those are all really
Oh
important
no, no.
things.
The student has to just remember, after a certain age, you can only force them to do so much. So the student does have to, you know, does have to apply themselves, at least in session, the very, very least, in session, if they're doing a tutoring program. So yeah, yeah. But you know, we've had parents that have used different tactics. we have we've had parents that have bribed their children. You're going to get a cruise with your friends if you attain this score. Or that SAT program isn't going away until you attain this score. So there are carrot and stick methods that have been used by parents.
Great. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Um, no, I want to thank you very, very, very much for your time. And the only thing I'll say is if anybody has any questions, I mean, it doesn't, anything related to even academics or test prep, whether you choose us or whether you choose another program, please feel free to contact me. Um, Academics is the one thing that I know about
Hmm.
in life, and I'm more than happy to help. I mean, I've had quite a few people that have contacted me who perhaps may not have had the means to select, to be able to do perhaps live prep or something like that. And I have helped them to select a good automated program that would work for them. So any way that I can help, I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been
Thank
Shift,
you.
a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Annie Tadros from AM Professional Tutoring. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT course by going to achievable.me, and you can use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.